The wrong first impression. Ethan Cole stepped off the small transport ship and breathed in the strange air of Shiara Prime. The sky above was a soft green, with white clouds swirling slowly like paint in water. He had come here for one reason too. Study the planet's rare atmospheric crystals for his scientific assignment. The job was simple on paper. Collect data, take samples, return to Earth. But he had no idea that the moment he opened his mouth, his life would change. Waiting for him at the landing site was a tall alien woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the color of the sky. She wore light armor made of woven crystal strands, shining faintly under the sun. Her name, as he would later learn, was Lyra. She stepped forward with calm grace, tilting her head slightly as if studying him. Ethan smiled and raised his hand in greeting. "I'm here for my assignment," he said into the translator clipped to his jacket. A soft chime came from the device as it spoke in the Shiara language. The villagers standing nearby gasped, some covering their mouths. Ethan frowned, unsure why everyone suddenly looked so serious. Lyra's expression changed, her eyes widening for a moment before a faint smile appeared. She gave a short, respectful bow in her culture. The words the translator had just spoken meant something very different. Instead of "I'm here for my assignment," it had translated to "I'm here to ask for your bond." To a Shiara, that was a marriage proposal. Ethan didn't know it, but in Shiara tradition, such a declaration was not casual. It was a life-changing promise. Once spoken, it was expected to be honored. The villagers began whispering to each other, some smiling warmly, others looking at him with curiosity. Lyra stepped closer, her voice soft. "Then you are welcome, human." Ethan, thinking she was simply being polite, nodded and followed her when she gestured toward a path leading into the village. As they walked, he noticed the houses built high into the massive crystal trees. Glowing faintly with inner light, children ran ahead of them, laughing and shouting words he couldn't understand. A few of them tossed petals in his path. He chuckled, thinking this must be their way of greeting visitors. Lyra led him into a large open structure at the center of the village. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of spices. She motioned for him to sit on a cushion while she spoke with an older woman nearby. Ethan set down his equipment bag and glanced around. The place looked like a community hall, with woven banners hanging from the walls. He thought maybe they were preparing some sort of welcome ceremony. When Lyra returned, she placed a bowl of glowing fruit in front of him and sat across from him. Her silver hair shimmered as she tilted her head, watching him closely. "You have come far to stand here," she said. "Yes," Ethan replied. "It's an honor to work here." The translator beeped hand once again twisted his words into something far more intimate. To Lyra, it now sounded like, "It's an honor to share a life with you." Her smile widened, and she leaned forward slightly. Ethan felt a bit uneasy. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something in her gaze that felt personal. Before he could say more, the villagers began to gather around them. An older man stepped forward and placed a crystal pendant around Ethan's neck. The crowd clapped softly, murmuring words of blessing. Ethan thanked them though. Confusion churned in his mind. Night fell quickly on Shiara Prime, the green sky darkening to a deep turquoise. Lyra led him to a smaller structure near the edge of the village. Inside, soft crystal lights glowed in the walls. A wide bed made of woven vines and soft furs stood in the center. Pillows were piled high, and the air was warm and fragrant. Ethan froze at the doorway, realizing this was no guest room. It looked more like a honeymoon suite. Lyra smiled and gestured for him to come in. "This will be our nest," she said warmly. For the first time, Ethan's translator gave him a direct and accurate translation. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "Our nest," he repeated. "Yes," she said simply. "Until the moons bless us." Ethan's pulse quickened. And not in a good way. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. But before he could speak, she closed the door behind him and began arranging pillows. The realization hit him hard, somehow, without meaning to. He had proposed to her. He sat down slowly, trying to figure out how to fix this. If he explained, would they be offended? Would they throw him out of the village? Or worse, would they see it as an insult to Lyra herself? He needed time. He needed to think, but for now, he was stuck and outside. The villagers sang a soft melodic chant that sounded like a blessing. For the new couple, Ethan stared at the glowing walls, wondering how a simple research trip had turned into the most awkward night of his life. Ethan woke to the sound of soft humming. The light in the room was gentle, filtered through the crystal. Walls like sunlight passing through water. He blinked a few times, trying to remember where he was. Then it hit him, Shiara Prime. The village. The strange welcome and Lyra's words about our nest. He sat up quickly, his heart racing. Lyra was kneeling by a low table, arranging what looked like breakfast. The food was colorful, glowing fruits, steamed root vegetables, and something that looked like bread but shimmered like glass. She smiled at him. "Good morning, my human." Ethan forced a polite smile. "Good morning." Lyra, the translator, gave her his words. But it also added an affectionate tone that made her smile even warmer. Outside, he could hear footsteps and voices. When he peered through the doorway, he saw villagers carrying bundles of dried vines, soft feathers, and sparkling crystal beads. They placed them in neat piles near the nest house, bowing respectfully before walking away. Ethan stepped outside and asked one of them, "What is all this for?" The villager's eyes widened. "For your binding, of course," the translator beeped. And Ethan's stomach dropped. He pulled Lyra aside. "Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding." But when the translator spoke, it said, "I feel unworthy of you, but I will try to be better." Lyra's eyes softened, and she reached up to touch his cheek. Ethan sighed in frustration. This device was going to ruin him. By midday, the village was buzzing with activity. Children played outside, weaving small crystal charms. Elders sat in a circle, discussing preparations. Ethan had been told that leaving the nest before 3 moons passed would bring great shame to Lyra and her family. He realized he was socially trapped if he left. It would insult her clan and possibly the entire village. He tried to keep busy. By setting up his scientific equipment in a corner of the nest, Lyra watched him with quiet curiosity, sometimes leaning closer as if trying to understand his tools. When he showed her a small crystal sample under his scanner, she gasped softly. "You wish to know the heart of the sky," she said. "Yes," Ethan replied carefully, hoping this time the translator wouldn't betray him, but it turned his words into, "Yes, I wish to know the heart of my mate." The villagers outside overheard and clapped. Ethan groaned internally that evening. A group of young Shiara males approached the nest. They stood tall, their armor gleaming, each holding a carved spear. One of them stepped forward. Speaking in a tone Ethan recognized, instantly challenged, Lyra explained. "They wish to test your worth. Test my worth." "How?" Ethan asked nervously. "By the trial of steps," she said, pointing toward a long bridge of woven vines that stretched over a deep gorge. Ethan swallowed hard. "And if I fail?" "They will think you are weak," she said simply, "and they will speak against me." Ethan had no choice. He stepped onto the bridge. Feeling it sway under his weight, the challengers followed, each trying to push ahead of him. One tried to bump him off balance, but Ethan stumbled forward right into the leader. The two of them tangled, and the leader slipped, nearly falling off without thinking. Ethan grabbed his arm and pulled him back to safety. The crowd, watching from the cliff, gasped, then cheered. Ethan didn't understand why they were cheering until Lyra whispered, "You have saved your rival's life." This is great honor. By the time they returned to the nest, Ethan's name was on everyone's lips. They called him Earthborn Warrior of Lyra. He had no idea how a scientist had just become some kind of hero, but he could see the pride in Lyra's eyes, and for a moment, he didn't feel entirely unhappy about it. That night, the nest was decorated with the vines and crystal beads the villagers had brought earlier. Lyra lit small lamps made from hollow crystals filled with glowing moss. The air was warm and sweet. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the decorations. "They think we're married now, don't they?" he asked. "Yes," Lyra said softly. "Is that not what you wanted?" Ethan opened his mouth to correct her, but the words caught in his throat. Something about the way she looked at him, hopeful, gentle, made him hesitate. Instead, he just nodded slowly, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. Outside, the moons of Shi'ara Prime began to rise, their pale light casting silver shadows across the village. Ethan lay back, staring at the crystal ceiling. He came here for science, for data, for research, but now he wasn't sure what he had walked into. One thing was certain, he was no longer just a visitor. He was part of something much bigger, something that might keep him here far longer than he had planned. Ethan woke the next morning to find Lyra already gone. For a moment, he thought maybe she had realized the misunderstanding and decided to call off this whole mate thing. But when he stepped outside, the truth hit him. Lyra was in the village square, speaking proudly to a group of elders about her human. Every time she mentioned his name, the crowd nodded approvingly. Ethan rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of this mistake grow heavier. He decided to focus on his research to clear his mind. Maybe if he finished his work early, he could leave before things got worse. Carrying his scanner and datapad, he walked toward the nearby crystal fields. Lyra followed him, curious about everything he touched. She watched as he scanned a tall, glowing shard embedded in the ground. "What does it say?" she asked. "It tells me about the air and how the crystals help keep it clean," Ethan explained. The translator, however, turned his words into, "It tells me about the air you breathe and how I will keep it safe for you." Lyra's eyes softened again, and Ethan realized too late what had just happened. Back in the village, the misunderstandings only grew worse. He learned that offering someone a cup of water here was not a casual gesture, was a deep sign of loyalty. When Lyra's younger cousin stopped by to watch his work, Ethan, being polite, handed her a small flask. The girl blushed so hard that her cheeks shimmered, then ran off giggling. Minutes later, Lyra appeared at the door, smiling, but with a dangerous spark in her eyes. "You give water to others?" she asked. Ethan froze. "I was just being polite." The translator made it sound like, "I only love you, but I wanted her to see my kindness." Lyra's expression melted back into warmth. "Then it is good," she said, walking away. Ethan's sigh of relief he made here seemed to have some romantic meaning. That afternoon, the village boys challenged him to another contest. This time, it was something called the Circle of Strength. Ethan assumed it was a wrestling match, but it turned out to be a strange game where opponents tried to balance on a narrow beam while tossing crystal rings at each other. He had no idea what he was doing, but his clumsy earth reflexes somehow made him dodge most of their throws. When his opponent tried to knock him off the beam, Ethan slipped but grabbed the beam with one hand and swung back onto it. The crowd erupted into cheers, and before he knew it, someone had draped a bright red sash over his shoulder. "What is this for?" Ethan whispered to Lyra. "It means you have passed the second trial of a worthy mate," she said. Ethan groaned inside. Later, he tried again to explain the truth to Lyra. He even opened the translator settings to check for errors, but the device's interface was written in a mix of Earth Standard and Shi'ara script. When he tried to correct one translation setting, the device froze. Lyra tilted her head. "You are troubled, my human." "Yes," he said carefully. I think you misunderstood why I came here." The translator twisted it again into, "I fear you will not understand how much I want to be here." Lyra reached out and touched his hand. "I understand," she said with a smile. Ethan wanted to yell, but all he could do was give a weak nod. That evening, the elders invited Ethan to a formal gathering. The meeting hall was decorated with banners and glowing crystal lanterns. Food was laid out in colorful patterns, and music played softly in the background. Ethan noticed that every few minutes, someone would approach and offer him a carved trinket or a woven band. Lyra explained, "They are gifts to welcome you to the bond." He didn't dare reject them. Might be seen as rude, so by the end of the evening, his arms were covered in shiny bracelets. At one point, a tall warrior from a neighboring clan approached Ethan. The man's eyes were sharp, and his tone was low and challenging. Lyra's smile faded, and she whispered, "He asks if you are worthy to protect me." Ethan sighed. "And how exactly do I answer that?" "By showing your heart," she said simply. Ethan had no idea what that meant. But when the warrior handed him a small crystal sphere, instinct told him to hold it carefully and nod. Apparently, that was the correct move, because the warrior grinned and stepped back. The crowd murmured in approval again, and Ethan felt himself sinking deeper into this cultural trap as the night ended. Lyra walked beside him under the twin moons. "You did well today," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her. "I wasn't trying to win anything," the translator spoke. "I wasn't trying to win. I was just being myself with you." Lyra's smile deepened, and she linked her arm through his. Ethan didn't pull away this time. He told himself it was because resisting might cause another misunderstanding, but deep down, a part of him wondered why her presence was starting to feel not entirely unpleasant. Still, as they reached the nest house, Ethan knew he had to find a way out of this before things got completely out of control. Yet every moment he spent here, the more tangled he became in their customs. It was like walking through a maze. One wrong step, and you'd end up somewhere you never meant to go. The problem was, he wasn't sure if he still wanted to find the exit. The morning began with shouting. Ethan was still half asleep when Lyra rushed into the nest, her silver hair unbraided and her eyes wide. "They are here," she said quickly. "Who's here?" Ethan asked, rubbing his eyes before she could answer. A deep horn echoed through the village, the sound vibrating in his chest. When he stepped outside, he saw them warriors from a neighboring tribe, dressed in darker armor, their faces painted with streaks of blue and black. They marched into the village square, carrying long spears tipped with sharp crystal. At their front stood a tall, broad-shouldered alien with deep scars across his face. He pointed directly at Lyra's people and spoke in a commanding voice. The translator in Ethan's ear caught fragments. "You have taken what is ours, crystal seeds. Return them or face war." Ethan frowned. Crystal seeds. That was the same rare mineral he was here to study. Lyra stepped forward, her voice firm. "We have taken nothing." But the scarred leader's eyes shifted to Ethan. "Then let the human prove it," the translator said. Ethan blinked. "Me? Why me?" Lyra looked at him with an expression that was both proud and worried. "They see you as my mate." "Your honor is my honor," she said softly. "If you refuse, they will see it as fear." Within minutes, the villagers had gathered around the square. The scarred leader announced a trial of courage. If Ethan could pass, the accusation would be dropped. If he failed, the neighboring tribe would take the crystals and possibly Lieza's clan lands with force. Ethan wanted to refuse, but the looks from the crowd made it impossible. This wasn't just about him anymore. Even though this whole mate misunderstanding was an accident, he couldn't let his actions shame Lyra or her people. He took a deep breath. "All right, what's the trial?" The leader gestured toward a narrow suspension bridge leading to a rocky plateau high above the gorge. On the plateau stood a massive crystal pillar. Glowing faintly in the morning light, the challenger must climb the pillar, retrieve the sky stone at its peak, and return before the sun moves 1 hand's width. The translator relayed. Ethan glanced at Lyra. That sounds fine. It is not, she whispered. The winds are strong, and the climb is deadly. Still? Ethan stepped onto the bridge, the vines creaking under his weight. The wind hit him instantly, tugging at his clothes and threatening to throw him off balance. By the time he reached the rocky base of the pillar, his hands were already sweating. The climb was harder than it looked. Sharp crystal edges jutted out like knives, and the wind howled around him. Halfway up, a sudden gust nearly ripped him free. He clung to a jagged edge, his breathing fast and shallow, back in the village. Lyra stood at the bridge, her hands clenched tightly. Every time Ethan moved higher, the villagers murmured among themselves. When he finally reached the top, he saw the sky stone a small, perfectly round crystal glowing with an inner light. He pulled a rope from his belt, tied it securely, and lowered it into a pouch. The climb down was worse than going up. One misstep sent a shard of crystal tumbling into the gorge below. By the time he reached the bridge, his legs were shaking and his hands were raw from gripping the rock, but he crossed, sky stone in hand, and placed it in the scarred leader's palm. The leader stared at it for a moment, then gave a slow nod. You have courage, the translator said. The human and his mate have honor. The neighboring warriors turned and left without another word. The villagers erupted into cheers, some rushing to lift Ethan onto their shoulders. He tried to protest, but they carried him around the square in celebration. Lyra followed, her smile wide, but her eyes glistening with something else, relief. When the crowd finally let him down, she stepped close and whispered, You have given me more than you know. That night, the village held a feast in his honor. Long tables were filled with food, and the air was filled with music. Ethan sat beside Lyra, still trying to process everything. He came here for science, but somehow he was becoming a part of their story, part of her story. As the moonlight spilled over the crystal rooftops, Ethan realized something important. He wasn't just surviving in this strange world anymore. He was starting to matter here, and whether he liked it or not, the people saw him as one of their own. That thought should have made him nervous. Instead, it made him strangely proud. The village was quiet the next morning. Ethan sat at the edge of the nest house, polishing his scanner and reviewing the data from the last few days. The trial had made him a local hero, but it had also given him access to areas of the land he hadn't been able to visit before. Lyra brought him a small basket of food. Sitting beside him without a word, her presence was calm. Yet there was a weight in her eyes. Ethan decided to take advantage of the new trust he had earned. He told Lyra he wanted to study the deep crystal fields beyond the ridge. She nodded, though her tone was serious. Few go there. The air is thin and the ground is dangerous. Still, she agreed to guide him. The path was narrow, winding between cliffs that shimmered with embedded crystal veins. The deeper they went, the stronger the hum in the air became. It was faint at first, like distant singing, but as they approached the main crystal chamber, Ethan could feel it in his bones. He set up his scanner and began reading the energy output. The results made his stomach tighten. These crystals weren't just rare minerals, they were part of the planet's natural defense system. The readings showed that they filtered toxins from the air, stored energy from sunlight, and even regulated temperature across the region. If these were mined, the environment would collapse within months. Storms, famine, and poisoned air would follow. Ethan stepped back, trying to process what this meant. His assignment from the corporation back on Earth had been simple: collect samples, confirm purity, send approval for extraction. He had assumed the mining would be safe. Now he knew it would destroy everything here. Lyra watched him quietly. Sensing his change in mood, "You see now why we guard them," she said softly. Ethan nodded slowly. "If these are taken, your people will die." "Yes," she said. "And not just mine, every creature that breathes here." He knew what he had to do. He would have to send a false report, one that made the crystals seem unstable or worthless. But doing so would mean breaking his contract, violating Earth's corporate law, and ending his career forever. He looked at Lyra, wondering if she understood the risk he was considering. As they walked back toward the village, the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the crystal trees. Halfway back, Ethan's comm device beeped. It was a direct transmission from the corporation. A cold voice spoke. "Cole, we've received your preliminary scans. Purity levels are perfect. Extraction teams will arrive in 3 days. Prepare the site." Ethan's chest tightened. 3 days, that was all the time he had to stop them. He shut off the device and stared at the ground. Lyra stepped closer. "What did they say?" "They're coming," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment, then said, "Then you must choose." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The village was peaceful, the soft glow of crystal lanterns lighting the walkways, but his mind was a storm. He thought about Earth, his career, the comfortable life he could have if he simply followed orders. Then he thought about the villagers, Lyra, the children, the way they had treated him like family. Even though his place here had started as a misunderstanding, it had become real. Lyra came to sit beside him, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders. "You are thinking too loudly," she said gently. He gave a small laugh. "I'm trying to figure out what to do." Her eyes searched his face. "If you protect the crystals, you protect us. But the Shiara law says that if I help you in this, I will be bound to you for life." Ethan stared at her, unsure if she was warning him or offering herself willingly. "Bound to me?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. "It is our waith. Those who fight together for the heart of the sky are never parted." He didn't answer right away. The idea of being bound to someone in this culture was still strange to him. But the thought of leaving her and the village to die was far worse. Finally, he said, "Then I guess we fight together." Lyra's lips curved into the smallest smile, but her eyes burned with determination. "Then you are my mate, not by mistake, but by choice," she said. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, not out of fear this time, but something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. The next day, they began to plan. Ethan would alter the scanner data to make the crystals appear unstable. For transport, Lyra would lead him to the Sacred Winds, a hidden place where he could transmit the false report without the corporation intercepting it. It was risky, and if the corporation discovered the lie, he would be hunted not just here, but across human space as they worked. The hum of the crystals seemed stronger, as if the planet itself was listening. Ethan had come here for science, for data, for a mission that was supposed to be routine. But now he was standing on the edge of trees, ready to burn every bridge. To save this world, the morning sky over Shiara Prime glowed pale gold. Ethan stood at the edge of the ridge with Lyra, the cold wind tugging at his clothes. Below them, the crystal forest shimmered, its hum vibrating faintly in the air. 3 days had shrunk to 1 by sunset. The human extraction team would arrive. He had run out of time. Lyra adjusted the strap of her satchel, her silver hair catching the light. "They will come soon," she said. "If we do nothing, the crystals will be gone." Ethan nodded, his jaw set. "Then we don't let them take a single one." They began their climb toward the Sacred Winds. The path was steep, winding between crystal spires that seemed to glow brighter with each step. Lyra moved ahead with ease, but Ethan's muscles ached from the thin air and uneven ground. Finally, they reached a narrow plateau where a great pillar of crystal rose into the clouds. The wind here was strong, swirling around them in constant motion. "This is the place," Lyra said. "Here. No signal can be traced until it is too late." Ethan set up his transmitter, his fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He opened the data files, ready to alter them. But before he could start, his comm device beeped again. A new message came through from the corporation. "Cole, our ships are entering atmosphere. Final confirmation required. Stand by for orders." Lyra stepped closer, her voice steady. "Once you send the false report, there is no going back." Ethan stared at the device, his mind torn between two worlds. On one side, Earth, his career, the safety of returning home; on the other, this planet, its people, and the strange connection he had with Lyra. He could almost hear his old instructors warning him about disloyalty, but he could also hear the laughter of the Shi'ara children. See the pride in Lyra's eyes, feel the trust the villagers had given him. He entered the new data into the file. The readings now showed the crystals as highly unstable, too dangerous to mine without catastrophic collapse. He attached his signature and pressed send. The transmitter glowed, the wind carrying the signal into the air like a whisper. It was done. Lyra touched his shoulder. "It is finished." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "They won't risk it now, for the first time in days." He let out a long breath, but the relief didn't last. From the horizon, the roar of engines filled the sky. Two large transport ships broke through the clouds, heading straight toward the crystal fields. Ethan's stomach dropped. "They're still coming." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Then they don't believe your message." They ran down the ridge, weaving between crystal trees. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the human ships were already descending, dust and wind blasting across the open ground. Armed corporate soldiers poured out, scanning the area with heavy equipment. One of them spotted Ethan Cole. "Step aside, we have orders to secure the crystals." Ethan stood his ground. "You can't take them. This planet will die if you do." The soldier's visor glinted in the sunlight. "That's not your concern, scientist." Lyra moved beside Ethan, her spear in hand, her voice sharp. "Then it is ours." The villagers began to gather. Surrounding the landing zone, they carried spears, bows, and crystal-bladed axes. The soldiers hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance. The corporate officer stepped forward. "Cole, you're under contract to belong to us until the mission is complete." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "The mission is complete," he said, "and I'm staying here." "You'll be charged with treason," the officer warned. "Then call me a traitor." Ethan replied, "But you're not touching these crystals." The standoff grew tense. For a moment, it seemed like violence was inevitable. Then the officer's buzzed orders from above. He listened for a few seconds, then cursed under his breath. "Abort," he said to his soldiers. "Head back to the ships." The humans pulled back, boarding their transports. Within minutes, the ships lifted off, their roar fading into the distance. Ethan stood still, barely believing it was over. The villagers erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the crystal forest. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You chose us," she said softly. "I did," Ethan replied. She stepped closer, her silver hair brushing against his cheek. "Then know this: our law binds you to me now, not by mistake, but by your own will." Ethan felt his pulse race, but he didn't step away. He realized he wasn't afraid anymore. He had made his choice, and in doing so, he had found something worth far more than the life he had left behind. The dawn light spilled softly through the crystal walls of the nest. Ethan woke slowly, feeling the warmth of the soft furs beneath him and the gentle weight of Lyra's hand in his. The quiet hum of the planet outside mixed with the steady beat of his own heart. For the first time since he arrived, he felt truly at peace. Lyra's silver eyes met his as she smiled gently. "Today is the day of binding," she said, her voice calm but full of meaning. Ethan nodded, the words still feeling strange on his tongue. But he knew this day was more than just a ceremony. It was a promise, a choice, and a new beginning. Outside, the village gathered, their faces shining with joy and respect. Children held flowers woven from crystal vines. Elders carried sacred relics. The air was alive with anticipation. Ethan dressed slowly, feeling the weight of new clothes given to him by the villagers, simple robes woven from soft fabrics. Light enough for the warm days, but protective enough for the cool nights. Lyra helped him fasten a necklace made of the rarest crystals from the planet, a symbol of unity and strength. They walked together through the village, hand in hand. Every step was met with smiles and quiet words of encouragement. Ethan saw that this world, once strange and confusing, had become a place of belonging. He no longer felt like an outsider or a visitor. He was part of something greater than himself. At the center of the village stood the great crystal tree, its branches stretching high into the sky, glowing softly with the light of 1,000 moons. Here, the elders awaited to begin the binding ceremony. Lyra's family surrounded them, faces both proud and tender. Ethan took a deep breath and faced the crowd. He felt their eyes on him, but instead of fear or doubt, he felt acceptance. The eldest elder stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of years. "Ethan Cole, Earthborn, you have crossed worlds and laws to stand with us," she said. "Do you accept the bond that unites you to Lyra and this land?" Ethan met Lyra's gaze, her eyes shining with trust and hope. He nodded firmly. "I do." The elder raised her hands, and the villagers began to sing. The song was soft and haunting, filled with the history of the Shi'ara people as the music swirled around them. Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. Lyra stepped closer, and together they placed their hands on the great crystal tree. The tree pulsed with light, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. When the song ended, Ethan looked at Lyra, his voice steady. "I never meant to come here like this," he said, "but now, I don't want to leave." Lyra smiled. "You belong here, with me. And with all of us." He took her hand again, squeezing gently. "I choose this life, this nest, and you." The villagers cheered softly, their joy filling the air. Children ran up to Ethan, holding out gifts, teeny crystal animals, woven bracelets, and flowers. He accepted them all, feeling a happiness he had never known that night. As they lay together under the glowing ceiling of the nest, Ethan whispered, "I came for science, but I found something more." Lyra's hand traced patterns on his arm. "Home," she said softly. "Your nest," Ethan replied with a smile. And for the first time, he knew that no matter what the future held, he would never be alone again. The planet outside pulsed gently, its crystals singing the song of life. And inside the nest, two souls, bound by chance and choice, began a new story, one of hope, courage, and belonging.